Hi, this is the second video talking about the immune system. In the first video we focused on the innate immune system, and now we're going to talk about the adaptive immune system. So, as we said in the previous video, the adaptive immune system is essentially the more specific, effective long-term response which comes after the innate immune system has tried removing the pathogen. And it can be broken up into two parts. We have our cell-mediated immune system, and this is mostly related to T cells, and we have our humoral immune system, and this is related to our B cells and our antibodies. So, in the previous video, we spoke briefly about MHC class 1 when we were talking about our natural killer cells. So MHC stands for Major Histocompatibility Complex, and this is a set of proteins on the surface of the cell that the immune system uses to try and work out whether or not the cell is foreign or if it's itself. So we have two types. We have MHC class 1, which, as we said, is displayed on all human body cells except for our red blood cells, and these have their own system of preventing themselves being broken down by the immune system. And we have MHC class 2, and these are present on the surface of our antigen-presenting cells. So some of our antigen-presenting cells, for example, are our macrophages and our dendritic cells, and these perform phagocytosis and then present the antigen on their cell surface. We also have B cells, which after an antigen binds to them, they're essentially able to steal that antigen and place it on their own cell surface to tell people that they found that antigen. So our antigen-presenting cells have both MHC class 1 and class 2 on their cell surface, and this allows them to show the T cells which antigens they found and activate a specific T cell response. So one of our types of T cells is our cytotoxic T cells, also known as CD8 T cells. And we have our antigen-presenting cell, which has its MHC class 1, and it has the antigen which it's presenting on the end of the MHC class 1. This then binds to our T cell receptor, which is present on the surface of the immature inactive cytotoxic T cell, also sometimes written as TC. And it presents this antigen to the T cell. And if the T cell recognizes this antigen, then it will activate the T cell, and then the T cell will go and break down the cell which carries that antigen. So it's worth remembering now that you essentially have a different T cell or cytotoxic T cell and T helper cell for each different type of pathogen or antigen which can be present. So that's why it's a very specific response. If it recognizes that antigen, then it's the only T cell that will break down that antigen. We also have T helper cells. So here again we have our inactive T helper cell, and this once more binds to the T cell receptor on our antigen presenting cell. But this time it's using the MHC class 2 receptor. And this essentially does the same thing. The antigen presenting cell is presenting its antigen on the end of its MHC class 2 receptor, and if the antigen is recognized by the T helper cell, then it becomes activated. And the T helper cell then has a role of releasing various molecules in order to activate the B cells and recruit them to come over towards the antigen. And this will also convert our B cells to our plasma cells, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it also helps to recruit our cytotoxic T cells, and then that makes it more likely that the correct cytotoxic T cells will become activated. So our B cells are part of our humoral adaptive immune system. And when these can become activated through two different methods, they can either be recruited by our T helper cells, or they themselves can bind specifically to the antigen on the antigen presenting cell. And remember, when this happens, they're then able to seal the antigen and present it themselves. So they are antigen presenting cells themselves. So these B lymphocytes, when they become activated, they're converted to plasma cells. And plasma cells are the cells which produce our antibodies. Now, antibodies have a series of roles, and these are called agglutination, neutralization, and activation of complement. So agglutination is where they gather together a number of different foreign cells and mark them as targets for our phagocytosis, which we talked about in the previous video, how our phagocytes often break down cells which have been opsonized by our complement or by our antibodies. So that's how this process works. They also have a role of neutralizing the pathogen because they can bind to parts of its cell surface and block them from working, and that stops them from attacking our body. And they also have their role of activating complement, as we talked about in the previous video, through the classical pathway where we have our antigen-antibody complex forming, and that's our C1. So this is just a summary of how the adaptive immune system works. We again have our PAMPs and our DAMPs present, or just generally our pathogen, and our antigen presenting cell will attack the pathogen and present the antigen on its surface. Now, when it presents it on its MHC class 1 receptor, then it will be recognized by a cytotoxic T cell using its CD8 receptor, and this will then break down the pathogen. If it's presented on our MHC class 2 receptor, then the T helper cell will recognize it, and when the T helper cell becomes activated, it itself will activate and recruit cytotoxic T cells. It will recruit more of our phagocytes, and it will activate and recruit B cells and cause them to be converted to our plasma cells or plasma B cells. Our plasma B cells will then produce antibodies, and our antibodies have our three functions, which are to neutralize the pathogen. They can opsonize it and make it easier for these phagocytes to break them down, or they can activate our complement through our classical pathway, and the complement then forms our membrane attack complex and breaks down our pathogen. And that's, in summary, our adaptive immune system. So it's very much a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it will give you a better understanding of how it works. Thank you very much.